Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a cybersecurity expert, right? Someone who genuinely tries to do the right thing.
Like a white hat hacker.
Exactly. Repeatedly finds these huge security holes, reports them, and then finds himself arrested, imprisoned.
And fighting a system that just doesn't seem to get it at all.
It sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it? But this actually happened. It's the story of Alberto Daniel Hill.
And it raises some really uncomfortable questions about ethics, about technology.
And about what happens when good intentions crash head-on into, well, a fundamental misunderstanding by the powers that be.
Yeah.
So today we're doing a deep dive into Alberto's story. It's incredible, infuriating sometimes, honestly. Our mission here, to explore those ethical tangles in cybersecurity, look at the completely unexpected consequences of just trying to help.
And face the stark reality of how digital information gets handled or mishandled by the law.
It really makes you think, who is responsible for fixing these problems?
Yeah.
And what's the cost when we scare off the people trying to help?
It's a critical question for all of us, really.
So Alberto's story starts pretty ordinarily, back in October 2014.
Seems ages ago now in tech terms.
Right. His ex-partner needed to book a doctor's appointment online. The provider was Círculo Católico Mutualista in Uruguay. Simple stuff.
Or so you'd think.
So Alberto goes to the website, sees the login prompt, and just almost on a whim types admin for username.
And admin for the password.
Got it. And bam, he's in. Not just logged in, but with full administrator access.
Wow. Wow. That's Security 101, Chapter 1, Page 1. Don't do that.
Seriously. And let that sink in. Full admin access to a healthcare provider.
Oh, man. The data.
Exactly. The scope was shocking. We're talking over 200,000 patient medical records exposed.
200,000. That's huge. All your private health details.
Gone, potentially. Plus sensitive financial info of the mutualist itself. Medication stocks, internal stuff.
The keys to the kingdom, essentially.
Alberto called it a red flag, an alarm. And he wasn't wrong. This wasn't a minor bug. It was a wide open door.
A catastrophic failure waiting to happen.
So what does he do? Faced with this massive discovery?
Well, if he's acting ethically.
He did exactly what you'd hope. He acted like a white hat. Or just, a responsible person.
He reported it.
Immediately. Sent an email straight to CERT Uruguay, the Computer Emergency Response Team. cert@cert.ya.
Okay, good. That's the right channel.
And get this, the response was incredibly fast. Less than an hour.
Really? That's impressive.
Yeah, he got confirmation from the CERT director himself. They acknowledged it was legit, it was serious, not just some auto reply.
So official confirmation, high level, very quick. That sounds positive initially.
It does. And you need to understand his motivation here.
Yeah.
This wasn't about money.
Right. Uruguay didn't have bug bounty programs back then?
Exactly. No financial incentive. He just genuinely believed it was the right thing to do.
His thinking was, if he didn't report it,
someone else, someone malicious, would eventually find it. And the damage could be immense.
Makes perfect sense. A sense of civic duty in the digital space.
Right. So he reported it, got the confirmation, and basically felt his job was done. It was out of his hands, onto the authorities. He kind of just forgot about it.
And that's where you see the core issue starting to form, isn't it? He followed the textbook responsible disclosure path, identify, notify, step back.
Yeah.
But that ethical impulse, that white hat action, is about to run headlong into a system that, well, it seems it just wasn't ready for it.
Not even close.
His behavior was exactly what you'd want from someone with his skills. But the critical insight here, even this early, is how vital technical literacy is for the justice system itself.
If they can't tell the difference between help and harm,
then the helpers are in real danger, and that's a problem.
And tragically, it seems, nobody really learned anything from that first incident. Because fast forward about a year, April 2015.
There we go again?
Yep, same situation. His ex-partner needs medical services. Same provider, Círculo Católico.
You're kidding.
Nope. And this time, the vulnerability he finds is arguably even worse, more alarming.
How so?
Within about 10 minutes, he realizes he can access all patient medical records. Not by logging in, but just by changing a parameter in the URL.
Oh, come on. Like just tweaking the web address.
Exactly. One little change, and he could scroll through thousands of confidential patient histories. No login, no check, nothing.
That's unbelievably bad. Even worse than the admin admin thing.
Way worse. And he immediately saw the danger, the real-world danger.
He figured someone could weaponize that easily.
Totally. He realized someone could write a simple script, generate a massive list of those modified URLs, each linking to a different patient's file.
And then feed that list to Google.
Precisely. Imagine that nightmare. Your private medical history, indexed, searchable on Google, just out there.
The complete destruction of privacy on a massive scale? Horrifying.
So what does he do? Again.
He reports it again, I hope.
He does. Follows the same ethical playbook. Reports it to CERT, gets a ticket number confirming they received it.
And then puts it out of his mind again, assuming it'll be fixed this time.
Seems so. He figured, okay, I've done my part. Again, the ball's in their court.
Twice he flags critical issues. Twice he gets confirmation. You'd think that would be enough.
You would think. Now, let's jump to December 2016. This is where things get a bit murkier. An action he calls guilty, but certainly not malicious.
Okay, what happened?
His ex-partner needed a specific medical certificate for a blood donation. It required old exam results from way back in 2009.
Right.
But the online system, it only let you search within a 3-month window, which is useless for finding something from 7 years ago.
Yeah, that's not helpful. So...
Oh, Alberto, using his IT skills, bypassed a client-side control on the website.
Okay, so something handled by the browser, not the server itself, like a date range restriction in the web page code.
Exactly. He tweaked it to allow a 9-year search instead of just 3 months. Found the results needed. Job done, right?
Uh-oh. I sense a butt coming.
Well, the unintended consequence. The server crashed. No. Though he points out it was back online within a few hours. It wasn't some catastrophic long-term outage.
Okay.
And he's always been upfront about this. He admits, yes, his action caused the crash. But he absolutely denies any malicious intent.
What was his reason then?
Purely convenience, driven by a practical problem.
Yeah.
His ex-partner was in the countryside at the time with terrible internet.
Right, trying to do dozens of 3-month searches over slow internet would be painful.
Exactly, an absolute nightmare. He just wanted to get the information quickly, saw it as a technical shortcut, not an attack.
So this whole sequence, 2014, 2015, 2016, it really paints a picture, doesn't it?
It does. Consistent reporting, then one accidental crash.
He's consistently identifying major flaws, acting responsibly by reporting them, not looking for any reward.
Just trying to prevent harm.
Right. And even the crash, while technically his fault, sounds like it came from trying to use the system, albeit unconventionally, not break it maliciously. But it highlights this massive systemic failure on the other side. These critical vulnerabilities persist, even after being reported multiple times by the national CERT.
Yeah, that's maybe the most shocking part of this early phase.
It begs that crucial question again. What happens when doing the right thing repeatedly leads to disaster because the system itself is fundamentally broken or can't understand the difference between a helper and a threat?
And that disaster, it was coming. Because the narrative takes this absolutely shocking twist in September 2017.
Okay, here's where it gets serious.
Seriously serious. Suddenly, Alberto Daniel Hill isn't just some IT guy. His name is everywhere. National headlines in Uruguay.
But not in a good way, I'm guessing.
Not remotely. The story being told is completely twisted, unrecognizable from what we just discussed. It's like a manufactured narrative.
What were they saying?
The media went wild. Reports of an attempted attack on the Círculo Católico server. Sensational claims about threats to disclose confidential HIV plus patient data.
Whoa, that's incredibly serious and inflammatory, especially HIV data.
Exactly. Designed to shock. And they claimed a ransom demand in Bitcoin.
Ransom? Bitcoin? Where did that come from?
Good question. The alleged culprit. Described as a 41-year-old IT engineer, cybersecurity expert.
Which fit Alberto's profile perfectly.
To a T. And the charges. Fraudulent knowledge of secret documents and attempted extortion. It was even branded as Uruguay's first virtual currency extortion case, a landmark case.
So they're painting him as this pioneering cyber villain.
Precisely. And then Alberto drops the bombshell in his talks. He was that person. He was arrested, charged, imprisoned based on that narrative.
Unbelievable after everything he'd done trying to report the issues.
The timing and context of the arrest are just surreal. He was arrested by Interpol September 9th, 2017.
Okay.
On that exact same day, Uruguay's vice president resigned. A huge political scandal, first time ever in the country. You'd expect that to dominate the news.
Absolutely. That's massive news.
And yet somehow, Alberto's case got more press coverage that week than the VP resigning.
How is that even possible? It sounds almost coordinated.
It raises questions, doesn't it? And here's another layer of weirdness. The journalist who broke the story that led to the VP's resignation, Patricia Madrid.
Yeah.
She was the very first person to interview Alberto in prison.
Wow. The connections are just bizarre. It's like truth is stranger than fiction.
Completely. Now let's get into the arrest details because the absurdity just keeps building. It shows this profound lack of understanding.
Okay, let's hear it.
First off, the arrest warrant itself had the wrong name on it. Alvaro Daniel Gil Antonioli instead of Alberto Daniel Hill.
Seriously. On the official warrant, that alone should raise red flags about due process.
You'd think.
Yeah.
Then the search of his home. Interpol didn't just take computers and phones. They took, and I quote him, everything they found.
Like what?
Like a paper guillotine.
A paper guillotine. What possible relevance?
Exactly. He uses it as a prop now to show how ridiculous it was. They took an anonymous mask.
Okay, symbol maybe, but hardly criminal evidence in itself.
And physical souvenir Bitcoin coins, the collectible metal ones.
Oh no. Not the physical coins again.
Yep. We'll get back to those. The official story, especially the Ministry of Interior's press release, was, in Alberto's words, surgically prepared to paint someone as a horrible person.
Crafting the narrative.
Totally. Giving the public this image of him as the worst criminal in the world. He says it was full of inaccuracies, but nobody challenged it. The media just ran with it.
Perception becomes reality, especially when it's the official line.
And the most baffling part, the crypto misunderstanding during questioning. They were aggressive, asking him, why do you have so much money?
Okay. Did he have a lot of cash?
He explained he was selling cryptocurrencies.
Oh.
Totally legal. He'd just sold 2 Bitcoins to a tourist for about 4,000 euros or dollars each. Used platforms like localbitcoins.com. All above board.
A legitimate transaction.
But the police response, unbelievable. They claimed, get this, they know Bitcoins for 10 years.
Which is funny because Bitcoin wasn't even 10 years old then. It was about 8.
Exactly. Shows their expertise right there. And then the physical souvenir coins.
They actually thought those were real Bitcoins.
They genuinely believed these decorative metal tokens were actual digital currency. They presented them as proof of his guilt in the interrogation.
That is profoundly embarrassing and terrifying. If that's the level of understanding, how can they possibly investigate a complex cyber case?
It's mind-boggling. Imagine trying to defend yourself when the evidence is based on a complete fantasy about how the technology works.
This whole arrest phase just screams disconnect. The gap between digital reality crypto, vulnerabilities, Tor, and the legal system's understanding is just enormous.
A chasm.
And it's dangerous. Because that ignorance gets weaponized, souvenir coins become proof, and anonymous mask becomes evidence of criminal intent.
Right.
It shows how a lack of technical literacy isn't just an inconvenience, it's a fundamental flaw that can lead to wrongful accusations and destroy lives.
How can you have justice when the foundation is built on misunderstanding?
You really can't. It becomes about perception, about narrative, not about facts or actual evidence. And that's what seemed to have happened here right from the start.
Absolutely. So Alberto's arrested based on this shaky foundation. What happens when this hits the actual judicial system? What does justice look like then?
Yeah, the courtroom phase, or even before that.
His time inside the system, in prison, it's just a stark, disturbing look at how things can go wrong. Systemic injustice, personal toll.
Yeah.
It's all there.
Let's break that down.
Okay, so the judge orders preventive detention just 2 days after the arrest, September 11th, 2017. Super fast.
That is quick. Usually there's more deliberation. What was the judge's reasoning?
This is where it gets truly bizarre.
Yeah.
Almost unbelievable. Reason 1, extreme flight risk.
Despite him having his whole life in Uruguay, home, family, business.
Exactly. He points out how absurd that is. Why would he flee? But okay, maybe debatable. Then reason 2.
Go on.
The judge claimed his high IT knowledge could alter the rest of the process. Specifically, she believed he could mentally alter evidence stored by Interpol.
Wait, what? Mentally alter digital evidence? Like with telekinesis?
Pretty much. Alberto jokes he wishes he had those powers. But seriously, that was the official justification for keeping him locked up.
That's not just technically illiterate. That's bordering on science fiction. That's deeply alarming for a judicial ruling.
He found it completely extreme and destructive. He strongly believes most people in prison, unless they're truly violent, could be managed differently. Bail, house arrest.
Alternatives that don't completely shatter someone's life before they're even convicted?
Right, less destructive. But nope, for him it was prison based on being a flight risk and having imaginary mind control powers over data.
The mental evidence alteration justification is just. It's flabbergasting. It shows a terrifying lack of understanding at the highest levels of decision-making.
It really does.
If a judge can base a decision about someone's liberty on something so fundamentally impossible, what does that say about the system's ability to handle any complex technical case?
It's a scary thought. And the path downwards continued with a coerced confession.
Ugh. This is often where things really go wrong in these situations.
During the initial interrogations, he's questioned by 3 Interpol officers. Crucially, he says he was never read his rights.
A major violation right there. Basic procedure.
One officer got really aggressive, grilling him about Tor, about specific URLs he didn't recognize.
Trying to build their narrative.
And when Alberto asked the officer for his name, just trying to understand who he was dealing with,
Yeah.
the officer just laughed and refused. No transparency, no accountability.
Creating an intimidating atmosphere. Classic tactic.
Then the next day, it got much, much worse. An officer gave him an ultimatum. A truly chilling one.
What was it?
Confess, the officer said, or Interpol would arrest his mother and his girlfriend, and they would suffer a lot.
Oh my God. Threatening his family. That's textbook coercion.
Absolutely. He was overwhelmed, caught off guard, terrified for them. And so, he confessed.
Understandable under that kind of duress, but legally.
He admits now it was foolish, naive. He thought, I didn't do anything, so they won't find proof. My innocence will come out.
A common mistake. People think the truth will prevail automatically.
He learned the hard way. Innocence didn't matter. The police said he did it. He confessed under threat. That was enough.
And that led to the 8 months of preventive prison?
Directly. Based on that coerced confession and the judge's bizarre justifications.
This whole sequence, the interrogation without rights, the refusal to identify, the direct threats against family, it's just brutal.
Yeah.
It shows how power imbalances can be exploited. It highlights how these systemic flaws aren't just abstract problems, they have devastating real-world impacts on individuals.
It completely undermines any idea of fair process.
Exactly. If your fundamental rights can be ignored, if threats can extract a confession, what protection does anyone really have? Especially when technology makes the case seem complex and scary to the authorities.
It's a recipe for injustice. And then things got even stranger with his release, February 2018.
How so? Was it finally overturned?
Not yet. This was something different. While he was still in prison, this guy started visiting him, repeatedly asking when he'd get out.
A mysterious visitor. Okay.
At the same time, Alberto's lawyer was working on getting him transitional release.
Yeah.
For good conduct, usually a slow, gradual process.
Right, you get a few hours a week, then maybe a day. Takes time.
But here's the kicker. 3 days after this visitor's questions, Alberto was granted 72 hours, 3 full days of transitional release per week.
72 hours. Immediately.
Immediately. The absolute maximum possible. It was so unheard of, the prison director actually had to call the judge to double-check.
That's highly irregular, to say the least.
And the irony, this was granted by the same judge who had said he was an extreme flight risk and could mentally alter evidence. Now she's letting him out for half the week.
So what was going on? Who is this visitor?
Alberto figured it out later. He checked the visitor's credit profile with the central bank. The guy was massively in debt. Basically uncollectible.
Okay. So what's the connection?
The horrifying realization. This guy wanted Alberto out so Alberto could help him rob a bank.
You cannot be serious. He thought Alberto, the accused cybercriminal, could help him commit an actual robbery.
Apparently. He thought Alberto had the skills. So this unprecedented release wasn't justice. It was orchestrated by someone with a criminal motive.
That is absolutely insane. It shows how easily the system can be manipulated by external factors, even criminal ones.
It's deeply disturbing.
Yeah.
And the stress of all this. It took a massive toll.
I can only imagine the injustice, the threats, the bizarre twists.
It culminated in him waking up in the ICU. He'd been in a coma for 3 hours.
A coma from the stress.
Seems so. His words were stark. Basically, I was like dead for 3 hours and now I'm reviving. His body just gave out.
That's terrifying. A physical manifestation of the trauma he endured.
Finally, though, some real light. May 2018, his lawyer's appeal works.
The appellate court.
Yes. They reviewed the initial judge's decision, the flimsy justifications, and overturned it.
Thank goodness. So he was free.
Released, yes.
Yeah.
But on $10,000 bail.
Ah, so not completely free and clear. Still had that hanging over him.
Right. And this moment, getting out on bail, led to this really bleak realization for him.
What was that?
He saw it crystal clear. If I have money, I can go home. And if I don't have money, I have to forget about leaving here.
Wow. The role of money in justice laid bare.
He said, justice is a beautiful word, but in practice, it might just remain a beautiful word. Its application depends heavily on power and money. That was his hard-learned lesson after 41 years.
That's a devastating conclusion to reach through personal experience, and his whole journey through the system, the bizarre detention, the coercion, the weird release tied to a potential bank robbery, it really throws the whole idea of impartial justice into question.
It does.
The irony is just thick, isn't it? Deemed too dangerous to be free because he might think at the evidence, then suddenly given maximum release because a loan shark asked for it.
It highlights just how flawed and, frankly, irrational the mechanisms can be.
It suggests a system susceptible to manipulation, driven by ignorance, and heavily influenced by factors that should have no bearing on justice, like whether you can afford bail or whether someone thinks you can help them rob a bank.
Yeah. It moves beyond just his personal story now. This experience really exposes fundamental systemic problems with how cybercrime is handled, at least in Uruguay.
It becomes a case study in systemic failure.
He paints this picture of alarming ignorance, incompetence, and a real lack of accountability within the system.
Based on his experience, what's his overall assessment?
It's blunt. He says there's enormous ignorance and incompetence of the people who decide the future of other people.
Strong words.
He uses the analogy, it's like asking him, an IT expert, for medical opinion. It's irresponsible when people lack the fundamental knowledge for the judgments they're making.
And this isn't just based on his own case, right? He had prior experience.
Yeah, going way back to 2004. He was the first expert witness in Uruguay under a new child pornography law.
Okay, so he saw the system from the inside early on.
He describes how Spanish authorities would send IP lists and local police would just seize devices and arrest people. No real forensic investigation.
Just this device was here, so this person is guilty. That's incredibly simplistic and dangerous.
Exactly. A basic unprepared approach.
Did he say why he stopped doing that work?
He quit after a judge asked him for an exact count of over 3,000 child abuse images. The sheer volume, the nature of it, and that bureaucratic demand. It was too much for his mental health.
Understandable. The human cost for experts dealing with that material is immense, especially without proper support or understanding from the system.
And he notes, back then there weren't many other IT forensic cases anyway. It was all very new.
So this history really frames his later experience. It wasn't an isolated failure in his case. It was part of a pattern of unpreparedness he'd seen for years.
Right. A system trying to deal with digital crime without the digital literacy needed.
And that lack of forensic rigor he saw in 2004 directly mirrors the lack of rigor in his own case years later. It's a systemic issue, not just bad luck.
So what are some of the specific failures he points to in practice?
From his perspective, what goes wrong on the ground?
Well, first, a huge one. No guarantee of a transparent process. Everything feels opaque.
Which opens the door to abuse, right? If you don't know how evidence is handled or decisions are made.
Precisely. He warns it makes it easy to frame someone, like send illicit material to their phone. Without a proper, transparent investigation, the recipient gets arrested, not the sender.
Because the process isn't there to trace it back properly? Scary?
He also talks about the qualifications or lack thereof of the agents involved. Interpol agents doing procedures often without proper education, experience, or forensic certifications.
Handling critical digital evidence without being certified.
Gives an example from his own case.
Yeah.
An agent handling evidence hadn't even finished high school.
Wow. Just asking for mistakes. Huge mistakes.
And he details one truly blatant violation. The chain of custody with his phone.
Ah, yes, the phone. What happened there?
An agent seized it while it was off, then turned it on right there. Even asked Alberto where to stop, while presumably looking through it.
Turning it on immediately contaminates potential evidence. Standard procedure is to isolate it.
He knew that, told them not to. But it got worse.
Oh.
Later, checking his Google location history, he found his phone was turned on and connected to a network for 5 days after being confiscated, while supposedly secure at the central prison.
Connected to a network, that's a massive protocol breach. It could be remotely wiped, altered, anything.
Exactly. He stresses a confiscated phone should never be connected. If it has to be, it needs meticulous documentation. Who, why, when. None of that existed. His location history proved it was on. The official case file had no record of it.
So the chain of custody was completely broken. That evidence should be inadmissible.
You'd think. And it wasn't just the phone. Other things went missing or were mishandled.
Like what?
An empty box for a valuable item was returned. The item itself, gone. The excuse. The empty box was the electronic medium listed on the warrant.
That's just insulting. It sounds like theft under the cover of procedure.
And hard drives just left scattered on the floor after the search. Just total disregard.
It paints a picture of carelessness bordering on contempt for the process.
And crucially, he says, there's no accountability. Officials have impressive power, but the consequences for doing things wrong don't apply to them.
Impunity. That allows these practices to continue.
And the absurdity carried right into the evidence presented against him. The supposed ransom note.
Yeah, the Bitcoin ransom.
It specified an amount in Bitcoin, but had no address.
No Bitcoin address. How were they claiming he planned to receive the ransom? Did the prosecutor not notice that?
Apparently not. It's a fundamental flaw in their own narrative that went completely unquestioned. Shows they didn't even understand the basics of what they were accusing him of.
Mind-boggling incompetence.
And remember, the USB killer.
Yeah.
The device found in his stuff.
Yeah, the testing tool.
Yeah. He had actually listed it himself as among the seized items, hoping transparency would help him. Instead, they used it against him as proof of malice.
Twisting something benign into something sinister. Desperate.
But maybe the most damaging part, the testimony from the CERT director.
The same director who confirmed his vulnerability reports back in 2014 and 2015.
The very same. Under oath in court, this director testified he didn't recall Alberto reporting any security issues with that server.
Didn't recall, after confirming them himself. Twice. For vulnerabilities affecting 200,000 people.
Alberto is convinced it was intentional. A deliberate attempt to make him look like a liar. He says, you don't forget something like that, especially when there are official ticket numbers in the search system.
That's a perjury, potentially. Or, at best, willful negligence.
Yeah.
It completely undermines his defense, which rested partly on him being a responsible reporter.
Exactly. A key witness who should have corroborated his story instead torpedoed it.
Wow. This whole section just lays bare the systemic breakdown. It's not just one error, it's layers upon layers of failure.
From top to bottom.
Chain of custody violations, fundamental misunderstandings of technology like Bitcoin addresses, twisting evidence like the USB killer, and then key official testimony that seems conveniently forgetful, let's say.
Right.
It really hammers home that question. How can justice possibly be served in this environment? When the investigators, the prosecutors, even key institutional figures lack basic understanding or, worse, seem to be actively undermining the truth.
It seems almost impossible.
It turns the process into a dangerous lottery, heavily weighted against anyone whose case involves technology the system doesn't comprehend.
So after all this,
Yeah.
years of fighting, the prison time, the public shaming,
Yeah.
what was the final outcome?
Yeah, how did this chapter finally close for him?
Well, the good news first. At the time he gave his big talk in 2022, the case had finally officially closed earlier that year.
Okay. And the result?
He now has no criminal record. Legally, he's clear. Vindicated on paper.
That's huge. A massive relief, surely.
Absolutely. But he's very clear. The experience left permanent scars. It was deeply dramatic.
I can't even imagine. Even being exonerated doesn't erase the ordeal.
No. He says he hopes nobody else ever has to go through something like that. The psychological damage is lasting.
A reminder that the process itself can be the punishment, regardless of the outcome.
And the public perception issue lingered. The media narrative was largely controlled by the Ministry of Interior's version, him as the bad guy.
Hard to undo that initial framing.
Plus that shocking privacy violation. The ministry publishing press photos with high-res images of his credit cards and ID.
Exposing his sensitive data to the world, that's negligence on a staggering level. Public doxing by the state.
Unbelievable. And there was that incident suggesting media suppression, too.
Right, the interview that never aired.
Yeah, 2020. A journalist interviews him for 2 hours, gets his side, but the channel won't air it because the Ministry of Interior refused to speak in response.
So effectively silencing his perspective because the official body wouldn't engage. That feels like controlling the narrative.
It certainly looks that way. Then comes this moment of pure, unadulterated irony. November 2021.
Okay, what happened?
He's at Interpol, picking up his last few belongings. And he decides to broadcast it live on Twitter Spaces. The whole interaction.
Bold move.
And during this live broadcast, guess who approaches him?
Don't tell me.
The same Interpol official who interrogated him aggressively back in 2017. The one who claimed to know Bitcoin for 10 years and thought the souvenir coins were real.
You are kidding me. What did he want?
He asked Alberto, to teach them about cryptocurrencies.
No! After everything. Why?
Because they were suddenly seeing a huge surge in crypto-related scams on Mercado Libre, the big e-commerce site. They didn't know how to handle it.
The sheer hypocrisy is breathtaking. The very people who misunderstood crypto so badly they used souvenir coins as evidence now need the guy they prosecuted to train them.
The official even apparently admitted their older, knowledgeable agents had retired, leaving a huge skills gap. It just perfectly absurdly highlights the lack of expertise he'd been pointing out all along.
That is a moment of cosmic irony right there, a total indictment of the system's failures.
So, unsurprisingly, this whole experience completely changed how Alberto views vulnerability disclosure.
I bet. He wouldn't be eager to report things again.
He admits it. After getting out, he kept finding security holes in other medical systems. The problems didn't magically disappear.
But he didn't report them.
No. He said he just took screenshots for ego, but kept quiet. He fully understands the fear now. Why would anyone risk it?
That's the chilling effect right there. The system, through its actions, actively discourages the very behavior that could make it safer.
His advice now to others, finding flaws. Protect your anonymity, because Uruguay still lacks legal protections for white hats. No guarantees against reprisal.
A sad but necessary precaution in that environment.
He argues passionately that incident reports are vital, the most important input for security. Discouraging them hurts the state itself.
Of course it does. You're blinding yourself to weaknesses.
And yet, CERT Uruguay officially told people asking that they cannot guarantee anything legally for reporters, basically confirming his fears.
That's an official deterrent.
So his big push now, education. Systemic change through education.
For who?
For lawyers, judges, prosecutors, police, and Quest. Everyone in the judicial system needs training in IT, in crypto, in basic digital literacy.
Creating a baseline understanding so these kinds of mistakes don't happen.
And he stresses the need for interlocutors, experts, who can bridge the gap, translate the tech stuff into plain language for the courts.
Makes sense. A translator for justice in the digital age.
His final message is really powerful. It sums up the whole painful lesson. Doing the correct and ethical thing sometimes does not give the results one expects.
Well, harsh reality check.
But he doesn't leave it there. He urges people, when you see injustice, don't stay silent. Take action and speak about it. It's the only way to improve things.
A call to action.
Yeah. He says if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. A real challenge to all of us.
And that really brings his whole story full circle, doesn't it? From ethical action through injustice to advocacy for reform. It's a powerful plea. And it highlights the immense courage it takes to speak out after going through something like that. The irony of the Interpol agent asking for training is just, it's the perfect symbol of the whole problem.
He really is.
The system desperately needs the expertise it simultaneously misunderstands and punishes. And that chilling effect he talks about, people not reporting vulnerabilities, that's a genuine threat. How many other critical flaws aren't being reported because potential white hats are too scared?
You have to wonder.
How many Alberto Hills are out there silenced? What collective knowledge, what security improvements are we losing because the system isn't equipped to handle good intentions in the digital realm? It's a question every country needs to grapple with.
Absolutely. So wrapping this up, Alberto's journey is just this incredibly potent, personal look at that clash. Good intentions versus a system that wasn't ready.
The system playing catch-up, often badly.
We've seen the ethical tightrope white hats walk, especially when there are no clear rules or protections.
And the desperate need for transparency, competence, and accountability in how the legal system handles tech.
His story is a chilling example of how an uninformed system can deter the very people trying to help make things safer.
That chilling effect is real and damaging.
And it forces us to confront that uncomfortable truth he learned. That sometimes understanding, or even just money, can weigh more heavily on the scales of justice than actual innocence.
A deeply cynical but perhaps realistic takeaway from his experience.
So it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? In this increasingly complex digital world with our data constantly at risk, who's responsible for fixing the holes?
And what happens when trying to help leads to such devastating personal cost? What price are we willing to pay as a society for security versus ethical disclosure?
Maybe hearing Alberto's story makes you think a bit differently about those simple website logins, or more aware of the vulnerabilities all around us.
Hopefully.
Or maybe it just inspires you, if you see something wrong, to actually speak up, remembering his words. The first step is acknowledging the problem, daring to voice it.
Even when it's hard. especially when it's hard.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a truly impactful story.